the lesson, or at least as I'm listening to you, is as a board member to remind yourself to look after the humans, that the CEO is a human, and that you need to create that space that allows them to surface up things that they are wrestling with outside of the day job that might be impacting the day job, or how they think about the day job, and creating that safe space for them to do that, so that you can be better positioned to help them navigate it.
I find this suggestion highly relevant. I think opening up the possibility to share how you feel, and especially if it's done multiple times, probably creates a lot of comfort and tolerance for a certain level of details. I cannot confirm that this would have worked in the Plan A environment, because I have Silicon Valley funds, corporates, and all sorts. They're all on friendly and terms with me. I can comfortably get in touch with anyone and get a pick up of the phone. I know their families. I know really a lot of personal details about them. But probably in this particular case, there was just such a combination of issues that led me to feel incredibly uncomfortable, because there was questions about how fundable the company would be after that, and so on and so forth. So, yeah.
But that's where, in my mind, it becomes so important to have that built into your structure as a board member, that even when things are crazy, even when the world is falling around apart, that you don't forget to create some time to remember that your leadership team, your CEO, is a human, and you mustn't forget that. Because if the human side of them falls apart, you're toast anyway. And it feels like that's something boards maybe under-index on, and board members under-index on thinking about. Hello and welcome to Enter the Boardroom with Newroll, the podcast exploring what makes great boards and board members. I'm your host, Oliver Cummings, CEO of Newroll, the board search specialist and market leader bringing science to the art of board hiring. Hello and welcome to Enter the Boardroom with Newroll, the podcast exploring what makes great boards and board members. I'm your host, Oliver Cummings, CEO of Newroll, the board search specialist and market leader bringing science to the art of board hiring. Today's guest is Lubomila Jordanova, co-founder and CEO of Plan A, a leading carbon accounting and decarbonisation software provider, and co-founder of the Greentech Alliance, a global community of more than 5,000 climate tech startups and 500 advisors. Lubomila also serves on the International Advisory Board for Climate to the European Investment Bank, Ghana, the African Climate Fund, and WEPA, the third largest hygiene paper producer in Europe, and sits on the Sustainability Advisory Board at Chloé. Previously, she was on the advisory board of Germany's Federal Ministry of Education and Research. Lubomila, welcome to Enter the Boardroom.
Thank you for having me.
Can we start by talking about your executive experiences that have shaped how you operate in the boardroom? As you look back on your executive journey to date, what have been 3 moments that most shape how you engage on boards today?
The first one has certainly been the formal setup of a board for Plan A in my company. I must say that before that, decision-making definitely felt a bit more disorganized and a bit less driven by data and timelines. The second one that comes to mind is probably joining Chloé as an external advisory board member. Chloé is a big fashion organization, different industry with big focus on sustainability. I was there and I've been there since quite a few years for my expertise on climate, but not necessarily expertise in fashion as deep as the people that would be joining the board continuously, because there was been quite a lot of changes. And the final one is probably the last 12 months. I know it's a lot broader than simply one instance, but the last 12 months, I definitely learned the value of having organizations kind of structure their ways of working with you in a formal way through the board, and how to make also my board engagements more effective. But I also learned probably the worst of what a boardroom can bring to your decision-making as an executive, and how it can twist your way of believing in the values that you bring to the table. So 12 months of hardcore probably development in knowing what a true boardroom means.
What a tantalizing introduction. Well, let's start by talking about the Plan A board setup. Talk me through that experience. What a board member listening today, or a founder listening today, who hasn't gone through that setting up a board can learn from your experience?
I think all of us founders probably go through the experience of Googling a topic that is really unfamiliar to them and pops up in their shareholders agreement or in a discussion with another founder where supposedly you should know it all, but you kind of don't. And for me, setting up the board has been certainly guided by the first investors that Plan A had. Probably there's a lot of knowledge that I could have gathered beforehand, and big advice and tip to anyone listening and considering setting up a company that would have such body, do the work beforehand and set it up not too early and not too late. The first structure that we had included two of the investors that put seed money in Plan A, me, my co-founder, and that's that. Literally 4 people, 50-50 decision making. Down the line, this has expanded significantly. And also there's been a lot of shifts in who can vote, who not, plus what actually the purpose of the board is. Because in a traditional sense, the board is there to guide decision making in the company, not to make decision making in the company. And depending on the stakeholders that you have, this can be successful in a different manner.
You said not too early, not too late. For a founder listening to this who's trying to work out where are they, what advice would you offer them to sort of guide getting that timing right?
It might sound a little bit controversial, but for me, setting up a board at seed stage was a bit too early. I feel that there is a benefit to work really closely for the first 12, 24 months after an investor puts money into your company with the investors themselves, but more as an extension of the operational team that you have, rather than meeting them only on a quarterly basis. In our case, we brought on board immediately really complex, archaic, old school institutions like a French private equity, German governmental fund, and that probably required for them to follow their traditional instinct, which was, let's make sure that there's a way to get reporting beyond the monthly one, have catch-ups, and then support each other ad hoc, but not offer too much time. For anyone that has the chance to select their investors, they need to make sure that the investors that they bring on board can really, in this fragile point of the company, be available ad hoc. This might sound really demanding, but I think if you're putting this first check pre-seed seed that is maybe 5-10 million, these are high risk money. And to make the return on investment for your LPs, you need to make sure that you working for the money to be not only going into the next funding round, but also to start justifying a path to profitability, the basics of KPI understanding, the basics of team setup, which goes beyond the work on a quarterly basis. It's a lot more heavy lifting.
Tell me about your experience at Chloé, which was a second kind of formative executive experience, or in this case, non-executive experience that has shaped now how you operate in the boardroom.
Since 2.5 years, I've been involved with Chloé, a fashion conglomerate owned by the Richemont luxury group, as a sustainability board member. I was brought on board by the previous CEO and the previous chief sustainability officer as an individual with expertise on sustainability, climate change, and technology. What has been fascinating about this experience is that this has been an eye-opening, educational, but also highly invigorating, exciting experience, because I've had the chance to share my knowledge. I always had homework before and after, but I've also been invited to participate and understand in depth a world that is highly complex and requires a lot of respect for the way the creative space works, highly different than what we are used to in the corporate sphere. And it gave me an opportunity to see over the years the way the company can save money through sustainability, can build a platform for visibility through sustainability, but also empower its own employees, who then would give back further with dedication, motivation, and even project development. There's a lot of work that we do at Plan A, also through our software, on calculating the return on investment on sustainability. This is the highly valued value proposition of our product. We literally calculate how much money you can save. And how it works is that you do an analytics assessment of your carbon footprint, other ESG KPIs, and you get an automated prescription on how you can reduce emissions, how you can make money through sustainability projects that the system identifies aligned with your industry and your company's trajectory of growth. And you essentially define a scenario for the next 2 to 3 to 5 years and decide whether you want to invest, whether you want to save, and then the system aligns these preferences to give you a pathway. We have been working with a lot of fashion companies, and the focus on saving there comes through a few different categories of topics. One is logistics. You can actually save in a lot of ways through making sure that your products don't travel the planet before they get to the client, because something that is quite hidden from consumers is that a luxury product sometimes needs to travel to another location for the packaging, and then maybe for the zip to be added, and maybe for just the final bow to be tied on the box, and no one kind of wants that. The second way in which you can save is through alternative textiles. And the final bit is through overproduction elimination. So really calculating how much you produce, how much has been sold, and then how to make sure that next time when you have to produce the new collection, you actually make exactly as much as it's needed, or you even make to measure, kind of build to sell rather than have overstock.
It sounds like you've been really energized by doing this Chloé advisory board role. I know some board members and founders would say, look, you can't do a board role while being a founder. It's you're all in, you haven't got time for the distraction. What would be your counter to that view? Or, is there a better time or worse time to take on an independent role as a founder, CEO?
One thing I can give my gratitude to my investors is that I've never been stopped of taking on the endeavors that I have been excited by, because they've seen how it also contributes to the growth of the company. The justification for anyone that is trying to explain why this is beneficial is that when you change hats, when you change seats of responsibility, you truly understand what it means to be a good board member that contributes, that helps. One might say at the end of the day is always politics, but I am someone that is incredibly studious and committed to discipline and being organized. So when I come into a project, I'm really 150%, which is sometimes exhausting, but I know that I've done my best to make sure that my knowledge is shared and it's beneficial for the other side. When I get out of this meeting, I have a lot of knowledge for my company on how to speak to board members, how to be a lot more professional, how to sell into larger contracts, and also how to be an indispensable part of decision-making within the company, not through politics, but through what truly moves the needle on the balance sheet of a company.
So it's the insight that you're gaining into a larger organization that helps you when you go back into that day job, and then also seeing the way that a larger organization operates that allows you to then get more out of your board and the way you're running your organization. The last of the three experiences you talked about as influencing how you operate in the boardroom is the last 12 months of your board. Take us inside the last 12 months. What has that journey been?
Unexpectedly, I need to mention Trump. There's been a lot of changes in the way the world started perceiving climate. It has been devalued as a topic in geographies where we have historically not been so prominent, like the US, but have client base, have also investors. And for the first time in my life, I had to sit at a board meeting and discuss politics, but to a level that a lot of non-experts on sustainability and sustainability legislation were putting on the table their fears about the trajectory this would push us into as an industry, as a company. 12 months later, we have not seen any significant impact on our revenue. We have seen a massive increase in our partnership pipeline, but also closed deals and deals that are through partnerships of the likes of Visa and others in the UK, in UAE, in other places in Europe. And it has created a bit of a disbalance in probably the way I believe politics should enter the boardroom of a tech company. But that's probably one of the big learnings.
You alluded when you referenced this for the first time to it being the worst case of what a board can be. Tell me more.
This year has been absolutely wild for me because I got a baby on top of being, in highly political discussions. I was 6 months pregnant. None of the people on the board knew about this because I was scared of having to mention it. And specifically because of being a woman CEO, solo founder, there's, a lot of issues that you think you can create for yourself.
Just for a board member listening to that, can you unpack why you were scared about mentioning it, and what can a board member who's sort of listening to this do to have helped you in that situation? Because it's a recurring theme I hear founders have things going on in the background where they're scared to bring it up because of the way they think it might affect the way the board members treat them. And invariably, when you sort of speak to board members, they want to know that stuff and they want to be able to help. So I'm really curious to hear what was going through your thinking at the time.
The one responsibility that I've developed over the years is that I need to hold it together for the whole company, together with the management. I'm lucky to have a management group that works alongside me and in any good and bad moment is able to protect each other, emotionally support each other, share burdens, even on a personal level, because we've gone through a lot. But that doesn't apply to any of the people that's on the board of Plan A. And that's because I've always respected that they don't need to know the inner workings of my personal life. I purposefully decided not to share with anyone that I was pregnant because I thought that this was an inappropriate moment to do that. This was exactly when the announcement of Trump winning the elections was. And I was getting overnight 50 phone calls from investors, people remotely linked to our investors asking me, is this going to impact your business? What does this mean? And I was at that time 4 or 5 months pregnant. And then down the line, like a few months had passed and there was continued discussion in the board, outside of the board, between different investors, some even pro dismantling any action on our kind of project development, strategy, trajectory. But on the other hand, also others that were highly supportive of maybe reducing in importance the climate topic. Really a lot of conflicting views on the board itself. And as I was obviously, in this personal situation, I thought that I need to focus on the fact that I have a supportive management team. I need to handle what's going on, like get these people to understand that climate is not going anywhere, that the legislation will be reduced in Europe, but there will not be any significant shifts in the way companies decide on climate, which is evident 1 year down the line. And unfortunately, I had to share when it got pretty nasty that I was pregnant because it was going to start impacting my capacity to protect my position as a managing director if I was not sharing this data, because you need to disclose these kinds of things. It's something that materially changes the company's management. Fun fact, because I'm employed by the German entity of Plan A, in Germany, as a managing director, you only get 2 months off for maternity because no one assumed that it would be a maternity. It's actually a paternity probably leave considered. I was not entitled to proper maternity leave law. Yeah. It's been wild. And then, I kept it together because of the management team. I kept it together because of my partner. And ultimately, in the background, what was happening was that I had to discuss Trump day in and day out.
But so what could a board member, if you now were sitting on the board of another organization where the MD was pregnant, you didn't yet know it, but what are the things that you could be doing, asking as a board member that would have been helpful for you at that time?
A simple phone call asking about even the political situation would have been helpful, because I probably, as someone quite open, would have shared that there's a personal thing going on in the background. Just being a bit more outside of the scope of the formal engagements, connected. I have multiple kind of touch points with all these people. It's WhatsApp, it's all these places. And this is not a, I don't want this to sound in any way. And it's very important to reiterate that, like, I really love my board because they're special people. It's a wild mix of people. But I can comfortably say is that at that time, I felt absolute fear of, or sharing anything about this because it was Trump. It was about the concern of the legislation being reduced and therefore the market of the company significantly shrinking. But also it was to do with, the future of the company, the fundability of the company.
But it reminds me of episode 74 with Dominic Joseph, who is the founder of Captify, where what his board did at the end of every board meeting was they would create some dedicated space for time to ask how he was at a sort of personal level. And even that maybe is too formal with a group of people. It's probably quite hard to fully open up. But it sounds like the lesson, or at least as I'm listening to you, is as a board member to remind yourself to look after the humans, that the CEO is a human and that you need to create that space that allows them to surface up things that they are wrestling with outside of the day job that might, be impacting the day job or how they think about the day job, and creating that safe space for them to do that so that you can be better positioned to help them navigate it.
I find this suggestion highly relevant. I think opening up the possibility to share how you feel, and especially if it's done multiple times, probably creates a lot of comfort and tolerance for certain level of details. I cannot confirm that this would have worked in the Plan A environment because I have Silicon Valley funds, corporates, and all sorts. They're all unfriendly, and at times with me, I can comfortably get in touch with anyone and get a pickup of the phone. I know their families. I know really a lot of personal details about them. But probably in this particular case, there was just such a combination of issues that led me to feel incredibly uncomfortable because there was questions about how fundable the company would be after that and so on and so forth. So, yeah.
But that's where, in my mind, it becomes so important to have that built into your structure as a board member, that even when things are crazy, even when the world is falling around apart, that you don't forget to create some time to remember that your leadership team, your CEO is a human, and you mustn't forget that. Because if the human side of them falls apart, you're toast anyway. And it feels like that's something boards maybe under-index on and board members under-index on thinking about.
I have a lot of sympathy for any founder out there because I understand that there's a lot of pressure put on us to always be the shiny, smiley face that is representing the company inside, outside, speaks on behalf of the investors, speaks on behalf of the employees, goes and changes hats, goes on stages. And especially if you're living in a windwhelm of activities, you have so little space for allowance to develop stable, even mental health practices. I became absolutely religious about this, and it made me probably a lot more resilient in this particular situation because I've been living for the last 5 years in non-stop setup where I will be speaking. Last year, I spoke at 250 events, and that's not for the vanity of it. I do business like this. You find relevant people there. It creates visibility for the company. It's nothing to do. I'm someone that is no ego driven. Learned my Seneca lessons when I had to, and I've been overwhelmed by the idea that when you get to the point of that much level of responsibility, the human in you can be totally belittled in the process. And that's where a founder needs to make sure that they protect themselves in any of these circumstances, because you can really easily lose yourself by thinking that you're at the mercy of someone else to live a good life.
If you're listening to these conversations and thinking, I'd love some support as I build my own board journey, that's exactly what the Enter the Boardroom community is for. It's the destination for current and aspiring board members, offering practical guidance, trusted insight, and a high-caliber peer community to help you build a credible board portfolio and succeed in today's boardrooms. Listeners can get 10% off. Head to etb.neural.com and use the code ENTER at checkout. That's etb.neural.com. I guess, Ryan, I think one of the things that people who've never been on that sort of founder CEO journey perhaps will never fully understand is how intense that experience is, that you are permanently giving energy to other people. And it's easy to forget to give energy yourself. And I think one of the most valuable things board members in organizations like this can do is re-energize and think about ways to charge the founder. How do I re-energize you? I think is probably a really helpful mindset for board members to think about. You've reiterated a number of times how much value you have got from your board and how much you value them. And I think one thing you alluded to at the end is it's made you more organized. Can you take us into a board discussion that genuinely changed the direction or trajectory of the business for you as a CEO?
One of our board members is Stephen King. He's the global VP for sustainability solutions in Visa. He has been someone that beyond the usual business discussions that we would have, would ask me how I feel. I must say this because he's been there to support me and the management team informally. A lot of projects that we have with this massive institution, definitely one that require for his team to truly believe in our technological capacity to solve the problem for any bank. And some of these big decisions have been made since the last funding round that we got from Lightspeed, where there was an honest and genuine debate if we should pursue a partnership strategy as a go-to-market one, which is highly risky, longer-term one, takes money, takes resources. And I actually got the board support for this with laying out the plan together with people like Steven and people also from Deutsche Bank, people from BNP Paribas who have also invested in the company, which led to now us making up even more than 60-70% of our revenue from these channels in transactions that are multi-million ones. And if this decision hadn't been made, we would have been still stuck in the reality where most carbon accounting companies are, where you subscribe for the software for 20K as a business. And then this carbon accounting company continues on to this door-to-door sales that ultimately is, let's call it, not driven by significant growth, especially in a fear-led reality where we live now.
So talk me through the options you faced at that time as a board and how you reached the decision to pursue the partnership strategy. What were the alternatives on the table?
There was a genuine decision whether we're going to put human resources on building up the whole partnerships team, building up the whole pipeline of partnership projects, and if we were willing as a company, as a board, to wait these like 6-10 month sales cycles that would transition into something significant, but without immediately confirmed monetary success. The other option was for us to stay put and be on the same course as we were before, which was simply doing door-to-door sales, putting up more SDRs, putting up more salespeople. At the moment, the whole company with multiple thousands of clients and a few massive partnerships with some of the biggest financial institutions on the planet is managed by 3 people. So we really have been able to navigate this in a way that it was cost effective on our balance sheet, but with the allowance to actually go into this path that has taken time to materialize.
And what gave you the confidence in your judgment? Why were you so certain this was the right approach to take to pursue a partnership strategy? Because it's one that many boards will face at some point or another. Do we take a partnership strategy? So what was it that gave you that confidence?
Every single one of the investors that is on our cap table, I've had to persuade individually, even some of them over the course of years. With Lightspeed, we built relationship for 4 years before they decided to invest in Plan A. With totally viable options in the US market, they decided to still invest in Europe. In the context of the big corporates, it was one after the other case where it was an unprecedented investment setup where 3 institutions that in some considerations could be considered not competitive, but definitely with overlapping capabilities, decided to invest. There's never been an investment where Visa, Deutsche Bank, and BNP have invested in us. So for me, it was threefold. One, it was about the people that I had been able to bring to the table together that gave me the strong feeling that there's belief and trust that Plan A solution can be overwhelmingly valid for the value propositions and needs of these banks and financial institutions. The second bit was to do with people. The people that were immediately put on the board of Plan A were at the global level, the highest on sustainability for all these institutions, which validated to me that this was an important topic for them. And the final one was definitely something that I judge a lot by, and that's my intuition. From today's perspective, 10 years working on Plan A, have predicted a lot of things that have ended up happening. We've been copied for a decade, and every move that we make always is one that excites the industry. And I feel comfortable to say that with this intuition, we've been able to create a lot of new categories, even of technology. And in that case, I knew that distribution through channel partners was going to give us the most solid way of having true economic and ecological impact.
So if I play that back, it sounds like you had good validation from the people you had around the table who both were at a level of seniority, but also in relevant industries to really be able to give you a good sense of whether or not your product was fundamentally going to work for them. So if a board member or CEO or founder listening to this says, Lubomila, I'm wrestling right now with whether or not to pursue a partnership strategy, what advice can you give me as to how I should think about whether it's right for our organization? What's the framework that you would give them to evaluate that decision?
It's shocking and maybe surprising, but from us, it has been put your eggs in one domain basket. We truly believe in financial institutions, and this has been where by doing one small project with another, we had the validation to go to the next institution, give them the possibility to see the value through numbers and then scale this forward. It's always about the small efforts that lead to the big outcome. There's certain industries where you can't play on multiple turfs. For example, we are a global partner with BMW, and we have fully dedicated ourselves on being the true experts on BMW itself. And we work with a lot of fleet management companies, but BMW as an automotive company is definitely a prominent part of our partner kind of rooster. Anyone building this from scratch should make sure that this happens at a time when they have had enough client validation, which can be turned into, because you want to go with a partnership proposal where you say, hey, bank, I now have a solution for all of your business clients. But you should have tested it at least with 10, 20, 100 business clients before you can go and offer a partnership, because otherwise you end up in consulting. And I'm saying this as someone, as a representative of an organization that has definitely been burned by testing all of it. We did pilots with banks, we did pilots with large corporates for partnerships, and the first 2-3 attempts were an absolute failure because it resulted in just press releases. The moment when you didn't kind of get it right is when you really focus on encoding into the contractual agreement the numbers, and you say how much money are going to be made jointly. This is probably going to eat out your possibility to increase prices abruptly, but it definitely makes sure that you are starting with the revenue, starting with the outcome that will move the needle for your board, for the company, and make the difference for your shareholders.
So can I clarify? So you're using the banks as a distribution channel and you're splitting the revenue with them. Have you had any pushback on that from the banks? Because in my experience, banks are often very nervous about being seen to be mis-selling. After a lot of the mis-selling scandals, they're very reticent about being seen to be behind a product that is not their core banking offering.
That's why Plan A actually comes in play in the partnership with Visa. Visa alone wouldn't be able to sell what Plan A has built. And in the same manner, Plan A itself without Visa wouldn't be able to go to a bank and sell something that is for 18,000 of the biggest banking clients of, let's say, companies of the likes of UBS or Barclays or Erste or others. Why this is possible is because we have, so to say, joint responsibility for two sets of knowledge. And the knowledge that is available on our side, which is science, sustainability, is not available on the Visa side, and they legally cannot offer these kinds of solutions. So in that context, we are actually giving our expertise in the form of technology. The banks pay for that and they offer this to their clients to make sure that ESG and non-ESG KPIs live in the same ecosystem. Decision-making for business can be made within the same realm, so to say, but the framework on which any analysis for any business is made follows the same prescription. Because the biggest issue that banks have is that their 400, let's say, biggest clients go to them with 400 different social impact reports or sustainability reports. You need to check, did they actually use the same methodology? Is it the same framework? But do we follow the UK one? Do we follow the EU one? Oh, are the emission factors actually on a global level or on a country level? Or are we looking at even, formatting of the data that granularly assesses, let's say, the emission equivalents through payment data, or is it through activity data? All of these nuances that might seem negligible can create a totally different picture on what the actual emission number is for a company. And within that context, for banks, it's useful to understand the true carbon profile of a company by offering a unified solution.
And I guess the key unlock for you is if you unlock Visa, coming in with Visa to those banks gives you a different level of credibility that then gives you access to that incredible partner distribution network.
Yeah, absolutely. This is exactly how it is. And this is why this decision has been so fundamental to the company.
So if you could go back to any moment in your journey to date at Plan A on your own board and intervene as a board member for yourself as CEO, what's the moment you'd go back to and what's the value you'd add that you didn't get at the time?
I think there's a few people, especially even outside of our board, that have been at the leadership of the funds that have invested in Plan A that I would have wished I established a more personal connection with, because in tough moments I had seen how important these investment committees are and these LP meetings. I've been at so many LP meetings from our investors, even being representing the receiver of the funds and being happy and explaining why this has mattered to our journey. But I wish there was a few people that I gotten to know better, because especially in the context of being so visible as a company and me as an executive, I've gotten comments not from the board, but from other people that oh yeah, your job must be that you are, constantly on stages, like LinkedIn posts and all that kind of stuff. And if someone looks in my day to day, especially in the context of, balancing a family, but also having a set of responsibilities that are so critical and managing a team that is not huge, like we are, 100 people. So I've had to take on a lot of responsibilities, and I've had always multiple hats on, and this vanity one has sometimes from the outside been judged. I literally have been told that I was a LinkedIn influencer, which would probably it could be considered as a compliment. I prefer to be a LinkedIn that helps people learn about sustainability, but it's definitely a really small part of my activity. So
You remind me of past guest Steve Rigby in episode 138, where he talked about the importance of building relationships in the good times with newspapers, journalists, and your bank lenders in his case, so that when the bad times hit, the things that you can't prepare for get a more favorable hearing. And it sounds like what you're saying is the advice a board member could have given you if you went back in time was to say, Lubomila, make sure you're going and building those relationships with the managing partners, the key stakeholders of those funds who are going to make the critical decisions when the sea gets stormy, so that when you have that moment and there's a 50-50 decision, it goes in your favor.
As a woman, sometimes you have no allowance to get this kind of support. And unfortunately, I need to use this card as someone that has seen bias decision-making in some contexts. I always have respected anyone that came in to support Plan A in any shape and form with the same approach, regardless if they were a woman or a man. I don't think this is the case for female founders. I don't think anyone that is as visible on stages or on LinkedIn, if is a man, would get these kinds of comments that I've gotten. For the support that you are to get from a bank or from your board members or from journalists, I think staying true but also human along the way is incredibly critical. I have utmost respect for journalists, and I always make sure that, if I meet one, I'm genuinely excited not to tell my story, but learn their story. I know some pretty cool people that, have written books, and you don't even know. You only see their articles in Bloomberg or in Wall Street Journal. They've written books, and when you read the book, be it about like big tech companies or others, like you truly see what drives this person. It's not this like 10-page about someone's funding. So as long as you treat people human, maybe there's perks along the way. As a woman, probably you need to make sure that you are guided by an understanding that you go out and fully into a conversation with vulnerability, but knowing that you have the allowance to set up boundaries quite early on. And that's something that probably people learn a little bit later on their journey.
Before we go on to the lightning round, it would be remiss of me not to pick your brains as a carbon accounting expert. For board members listening who might not be as knowledgeable on this space as they would like to be, what's one thing they should keep top of mind on this front?
Decarbonization can save you money. In today's reality, every single company needs to do a carbon accounting assessment and see where they're leaking money. We, as industrials, as business people, quite often live with a prescribed way of thinking about spend. And there's a good way to see it through a different lens if you do a carbon accounting assessment, where you would immediately flesh out how much you're losing on travel, entertainment, logistics, but also through the ecological, economical assessment. And I can speak with numbers. We've been able on average to save, even for large corporates that we work with, between 5 and 10% on an annual basis, which is significant. We're talking about, in some cases, hundreds of millions.
5-10% of revenues.
Yeah.
And when you look at all the different organizations that you've worked with, are there common pitfalls that a board member thinking about raising this at board level should be aware of, where you see organizations who set off with good intentions fall down?
The biggest issue that we've had probably has been to not anticipate what the outcomes will be when sustainability became less important. I think getting your investors, your board, to understand the basics and of scope 1, 2, and 3 implications on fundability, bankability of a company. Companies are considered higher risks if they have not done their carbon accounting and their ESG assessments. This also is leading to lower stock performance. So all of these data points, if at least presented to the board in the beginning of a year, can give guidance on how to invest in these projects selectively, of course, not to make this the prominent topic, but to tick it off the box that is not for compliance only, but also for stable balance of the company.
Lubomila, time has flown, which means it's time for the lightning round, where I'm going to ask you a short question and ask you for a quick response if you're ready.
Let's go.
Best book every board member should read, and why?
Siddhartha, because it talks about the journey that all of us go through. Doesn't matter if you're a board member or just the next person you see on the street.
Most impactful question you've heard in the boardroom?
Why is it so important for you to invest in partnerships?
Boardroom behavior that irritates you most?
Switching off the camera, reading something, doing 10 things at the same time.
Most valuable board ritual?
Taking time to travel and to see each other. This is probably the most unsustainable advice that I would give, but having the possibility to shake hands, have a dinner, have a lunch, discuss life makes a big difference.
Favorite quote?
So many. Finish poetically, to be or not to be. I think we quite often forget that we have free will and a lot of decision-making power.
Most significant professional insight?
Be humble.
Worst professional advice you've ever received?
Take the money and leave.
What have you changed your mind on about boards over time?
Why they even exist? The stipulated value of a board is not to make decision, but to advise on decision making. As long as you get to know the founder and the other board members, good decisions can be made and can then be implemented in the company.
How are you better today as a board member than when you started?
I feel like I've experienced enough to be unbiased and share my knowledge without an expectation to shine light on my persona.
And finally, 3 things our listeners should take away from this episode, if they take nothing else.
Be humble. Make jokes when you can, so people smile. The board is there to support your decision making, but also educate you on what is out there before you have experienced it.
Lubomila, thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom and experience.
Thanks so much.
If today's guest has got you reflecting on your own board journey, Enter the Boardroom community is there to support you. Designed for emerging, developing, and established board members, the community brings together expert guidance, structured programs, peer connection, and access to real board opportunities, all without noisy networking or false promises. It's informed by Newroll's Board Insight, but focused on helping you become a stronger, more credible board member. Listeners can get 10% off. Head to etb.newroll.com and use the code ENTER at checkout. That's etb.newroll.com.